my mentor and this kind of stuff. It's a MODO 13 version. So he will show us how to create an interior using the vRay, so a technology with which you are everybody super familiar, but using this software, which is the MODO 13. Thank you, Michele. You can start whenever.
Okay, thank you everyone for having me, and thank you, Eduardo, for this opportunity. Today, as Eduardo said, we will see one of my Archviz projects. It's an ongoing project, and we will see it on MODO 13 and vRay Next. They are both brand new because vRay Next for MODO is in beta since a week ago, and MODO 13 has just came out, so we may have some instability. I didn't experience that yet, but it just so you know that they are really new and one of the two software is in beta. Before getting started, I would like to tell you first who am I and why I'm talking to you, what I've done so far, and secondly, why I picked up MODO and vRay. Who am I? I'm Michele Faccoli. I'm a 3D artist based in North Italy, and I graduated about 10 years ago in a private school in graphic design and multimedia, where I had the experience to learn 3D Studio Max and Blender. After graduating, I decided to work as a freelancer right away, mainly because Italy is kind of behind with new technology. And back then it was kind of difficult to find a job in this field. So I decided to try and look on an outsourcing platform. And I found a job for a startup in New York. And that job was about modeling real-time assets for Unity. And that Unity plugin could let you and let the client see his house, his restaurant, inside of a browser such as Google Chrome. You just type in an address on the browser and you get to see your house in real time. And that was about 10 years ago. Then I moved on and I worked as an employee in an interior design company for a couple of years, where I've learned a lot of stuff about interior design and how to deal with clients, both designers and the final clients, those who buy a house or requires some interior design experience work from us. And then I moved on once again and I started working with 3D, with doing product visualization such as ceramic catalogs, lighting catalogs, and as of now I'm still working in that kind of field. The request of 3D artists in that field is growing stronger than ever, mainly because new technology allows you to do very difficult stuff very easily, and that's something we will see in a minute. So that's kind of my experience, about 10 years of freelancing. As a freelancer, I decided to pick MODO, and that's for several reasons. First reason, I had bad experiences with other softwares at the beginning, such as 3D Studio Max and Blender. I had a lot of bugs and crashes, which slowed down my usual job. And that was kind of game breaking. So I decided to try other softwares and I was pointed to MODO. Back then it was the MODO 501 and it was basically only a modeling software with a rendering engine, a native render engine. And I have to say MODO was born as a modeler software and it's one of the best modeler out there. And it had one of the best render engines back in the days. We could use real-time rendering even 10 years ago. So we could literally play and have the real-time we have now in vRay, but back 10 years ago. This being said, MODO is it's very cheap as a software, and as a freelancer, when you have to compete with bigger companies with bigger budgets and bigger clients, what I decided to do was to find a way to work faster with the cheaper software that was perhaps younger. I didn't have a pipeline of work back then, and that allowed me to be a little more, to have a broader way to act compared to companies that have to rely on software that every year doesn't get so much updates and costs a lot. I won't do the names right here, but You may know them. Beside MODO, I decided to pick up vRay, and that's it happened about 2 years ago, and that's because vRay for MODO was developed about 2 years ago. And the reasons are pretty simple. The first, it's rock solid, which means you basically never crash using vRay. I never experienced a crash while rendering with vRay, and that's very rare. Working with the MODO native render engine, which is very good in terms of quality, I had some problems crashing or having slowdowns and freezes. It's really fast. It's the render so fast that basically I can get a high speed up in terms of render speed while having cleaner images. So I don't have to fiddle with settings in order to remove noise or fireflies for my renderings. We will see what these settings will be later on. But as a general point of view, I decided to pick one of the best modder on the market, which is MODO, and one of the best renderer, which is vRay. It was told a few days ago by CG architects that vRay right now is used by about the 60% of the studios out there. So knowing vRay will allow you to both know how it works, and since it is the same in every package, you can use your vRay knowledge both in 3D Studio Max or Maya or MODO. Being both very cheap, because vRay Next for MODO is way cheaper compared to any other vRay like for 3D Studio Max and Maya. As a freelance, I managed to have two very strong packages doing their own job while spending all considered very little. This being said, let's see a few renderings from the projects I would like to show you. It's the restoration of a rather old villa here in Italy, and the client required me to change almost everything beside the ceiling. And these are some of the renderings. As you can see, everything below here is 3D. It's 3D. Even the ceiling is 3D, but it's existent. So this was photographed and placed in the renderings. And the same happens over here. This is a completely vRay GPU rendering made with vRay Next. All the gold decoration were handmade. So I went to the client house. I did some photographs. I pushed them into Photoshop and then modeled, and with some sculpting on ZBrush, I managed to obtain these kind of shapes and models. I would like to start this talk by showing you this quote, because that's the kind of philosophy I'm using usually, and that's how I tackled this project, which is in most fields of endeavor, there are no easy jobs. There are only graceful ways of performing difficult ones. That's what I tried to do here, because as you can see, the two main renderings we will be seeing now are simple room with one window, and it may look simple, but it has some things that are worth checking out, because they were made smartly, considering that the client might ask for a lot of changes, and that might disrupt your workflow, your prices, and everything you consider to start with.
Michele, sorry, we have a question here. May I interrupt you a second? Andrea, welcome. So, how long this picture we see? How long it takes one picture to render?
These two renderings, completely on GPU hybrid rendering, were made at 4K resolution. They took 1 hour and 40 minutes one, and about 2 hours the second one. We are talking about 4K resolution. For a 2K resolution, I get times like 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and that's because I use a very low noise threshold to be sure to completely remove noise. And consider that I used an HDRI lightning, which we will see later on, and those were known to be extremely slow to clean up, but using adaptive HDRI, I managed to cut down render times a lot. Is it good?
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Let's go on. As I was saying, we will tackle about 7 to 8 subjects, and I tried to use brain over brawn, so I tried to do the smartest thing I could for certain subjects. Let's start first with having a look at MODO, so that you will know later on where I'm moving the mouse, what I'm doing, and if you were to consider trying out MODO just to have an experience with it, and you may consider trying, I will let you know where are things in the viewport. So,
and by the way, Michele, sorry, MODO, as I know, for the student, it's really cheap, or it's even free for sure. You can give a try for 1 month for free.
Right now, you can have it free for 1 year. It changed about 2 weeks ago, so you can have 1 year free of educational licenses. And yeah,
so it's worth a try, right? 1 year free of educational licenses. I think nobody else is doing it. All right, thank you, Michele.
No problem. This is the viewport that you will see once you open up your MODO. There are really small changes I did, but they are almost invisible to you. First off, I would like to explain you how works the philosophy behind MODO. MODO became rather famous because it had the chance to have different layouts in which you could do specific tasks. So you could go into a layout which will allow you to work on UV maps, a layout to work on retopology, and that will remove anything useless for the task you were looking for. And that's still present, but MODO is evolving, and now it gives you the chance to have everything you need within one single layout, and hide and unhide what you need or don't need. So just so you know how to move between those, in this top row, this darker row over here, you can see we have MODO, model, animate, but those are only a few. If you click on this star over here, you will activate any kind of layout where you can do specific tasks such as UV mapping, retopology, or animating, or even rendering with vRay, and so on. We won't treat each one of those because the philosophy behind MODO is still the same between all of those. So I will be showing you the main one, the one which has everything within it. And just to hide this bar, I will click here and we can go back to our viewport. So to make it extremely simple and fast, we have in MODO 3 main parts, which are a left column, in which we have everything related to modeling, to modifying a model, a mesh, so we can model whatever we want, create a primitive or modify that, or we can unwrap, retopology, paint. We pretty much have anything that is related to modeling or creating new shapes. We have a viewport in the middle, which allows us to look, let's add a cube just to let you see, which will allow us to have our model and get around it. And as any other software, we can move between different perspectives. We can move between different visualization methods. And the cool part is that we can do that by pressing Ctrl space, for example, and make it real fast, Ctrl 2. I won't tell you everything in detail about key bindings, just so you know, if there is a key on your keyboard, something will be linked to it. MODO has key bindings for pretty much everything. It's important to know that if you want to access settings, and we may adjust them in the future, we have to click on this cogwheel or press the O button, and we get into the 3D viewport properties, and that's useful because it allows us to specificate how to visualize our main mesh compared to an inactive one. Just to make an example, let's make a sphere, put it outside, and as you can see, I have an active mesh, which is this one, and the inactive mesh looks the same. If I deactivate this button, we have 2 different visualization. That's very helpful when you're working, and we will see this in a minute, because you can split between what you're working with and what you want to be partially hidden. Back to the viewport, we have the last part, which is our right column. And this is the column you can remember as the list column. Everything is listed within it. So we have our scene and everything you may have inside a scene, which is an item, a camera, a directional light, a replicator, whatever you see here, whatever that is going to fill within the viewport is going to be counted within our scene and our item list. We have the shading, which is the shader tree, the shader list, which has everything related to shaders and rendering. So we have the render settings, render outputs, our materials, lights and environment, everything within this tab. And then we have something more complex like groups, which we will see as the last thing, or images, which we have none, so we don't have anything in it. It's important to know that when we click on something, we get its properties right below our item list. So if I click on sphere, I get the item properties of the sphere. If I click on the camera, I get the item properties of the camera, and the same can be said for the materials. So I click on my material, and I get my material properties, which are basically very long over here. So that's I'm trying to sum up the whole viewport so that you can distinguish where you're going to act if you want to model something, where you will be seeing it, and where it will be listed where is the list with all your items in the scene. We also have to distinguish, and I will be real fast on that, between item mode and component mode. If you're using 3D Studio Max, you will know about having an item and having to use editable poly in order to model that. We don't really need to use editable poly in MODO. All we need to do when we are in item mode by pressing 5, we can click one of those buttons over here, and we can select either polygons or edges or vertices. And by pressing 1, 2, and 3, we can move between them. That's very helpful because, as I told you, on the left column we have the choice to model things. So if I want to model this cube, I can click, I'm on polygons, I can click on the polygon, and I can see that I have a polygon tab with all the polygon tools we have in MODO. There is a full list, and we can easily get inside and start modeling and confirm by pressing space. I don't want to waste you any more of your time with this. That's just to give you an overall idea on things. I will get started now on our projects and the scene I prepared for you. So, the first thing I will show you is how I usually start with building a structure in MODO. We have the choice between using direct modeling and procedural modeling. In this case, I would like to be smart, especially when it comes to frequent changes. I don't know if it's an Italian thing, but having a lots of change is kind of common. So it's good to know how to go back to your job without having to change completely the topology of your models. And to do so, we will use the best out of the procedural modeling tools, which are something close to what you may know as the layer stack in 3D Studio Max. And we will use booleans to cut through our walls real fast. So let's get into our scene specific for this. For this job, I was given both a 3D CAD from an architect, which was the previous existing model of the house, and I was given this image, this backdrop image we call, which is a texture I simply dragged and dropped into MODO. That's the fastest way to work with this kind of models. Illustrators and CADs, to me, don't always prove to be useful, so I prefer to use drawings, but that's up to choice. So let's get started and try out how to model real fast this kind of structure. I won't show you all of it, but just the philosophy behind it. So we will start with a new mesh item. So we can go in here and create our new mesh, and I will call it shell, and activate my cube. As I told you, it's on the left column, and draw a basic shape just to take in all of the walls, and I will move this upward. And I'm using a base shape, these base walls, just to avoid using real numbers, making it somehow faster. Now I can go back to this, check out if I'm right, and it's fine. And let's select the two polygons, go back to wire, and I will go into polygons since I'm modeling with polygons and bevel. I'm avoiding using shortcuts so you can see where I'm going to find things. And let's bridge the polygons. And now I have this shape. How do I achieve in a fast way this kind of holes in the wall and make it so I can go back and change them anytime? Well, let's grab, so I can avoid to model this, let's grab this kind of shape. And the cool part about MODO is that you can Ctrl-C and Ctrl-V, copy and paste your model. So we can get this as our boolean. And let's model this a little so that it's a closed shape. So let's flip the polygons, and let's close here, and let's close down here with edges, bridge. Let's close all of this by polygon, pressing P, and just to make sure it's a quad, I will make a quadruple, and now I have my quads. Now, this is the same mesh as before. I will just drag this a little out, the same for this, because this is going to be used as a boolean, so I want it to cut through the previous shell item. And now, if I want to have let's activate both of them. If I want this to become a procedural boolean, I will have to activate the mesh operation tab. To do so, I will go top here and go into mesh operations. I'm selecting the shell item and do a boolean. It will ask me what will be my boolean mesh, which is boolean, and I want it to subtract. And I have the cut right away. That's very cool because I can keep modeling, so I can go on and build all the windows in my scene rather fast. And for example, this was previously a window which became a glass door entirely. So let's go back here. As you can see, it's all live, it can be changed any minute. And now I want this to become a complete glass door. So I want to close it down to the bottom. And if I push this outward and go back to visualize this, as you can see, I'm modeling live. And that's very cool because if my client, and it happens a lot, will tell me, no, I would like this to be completely closed, I can model this shape and have a procedural mesh working for me. And if you're to use this everywhere, you can basically build the entire house procedurally and go back anytime. So I can also, for example, go back to my boolean. Let's grab my pen and draw something here like this. And now if I were to bevel this, as you can see, I'm cutting through this and it's done. No need for modeling, polymodeling, which is kind of boring to me. You can clean it at the end of your job when you're clear that this is how the client wants it. And you can keep on going with the mesh operation, so I can like triangulate this. And to avoid too much triangle, I can go back and detriangulate it, so I get clean polygons on all the surfaces where I don't have these cuts. And this can be really used anywhere, and as you can see, it's changing real time. So that's how I built the wall. I usually build the walls this way whenever possible. And to end this, I can simply right-click my shell, go into freeze mesh operation, duplicate and freeze, and now this is a polygon I can model and move however I want. So, this being said, let's move to the second part of it, which is the ceiling gold decorations. I won't show you all the steps manually, and that's because those take a really long time, very different software. I will tell you the philosophy behind it, how I did it, and why I did it this way. So first of all, I've photographed all the existing decoration, which we tried to preserve and to save because the final client, the owner of the villa, wasn't really into saving them, but those have some historical value, and my client, which is the interior designer, did want to save them. So we decided to go there, photograph everything, and then I moved on, and I used Photoshop to straighten everything. And back to MODO, I modeled the silhouette, the shape of those decorations, and I used the ZBrush to sculpt some details and make them a little more believable. In the end, I managed to avoid having too much polygons. I baked everything into a displacement, opacity, and normal maps. So let's go for steps. First thing, I will show you some photo from the ceilings of the existing house. This house has about 200 years, so it's rather old. And this is the room I shown you before, and we will see again. As you can see, we changed everything beside the ceiling. And these were the different steps we did. So first thing first, I moved the photo into Photoshop and I straightened it. So if I go in here, you can see they were straightened as much as I could. I went on and isolated the part I could mirror. So this part could be mirrored over here, and these will be part of another decoration I will model later on. I then modeled them in MODO, and I will show these as well later, at least a few parts, so that you can see once again the power of procedural modeling along with direct modeling. And after having modeled this silhouette, I moved everything into ZBrush and I sculpted some details. It's not very precise. That's because the decoration itself were kind of ruined. They had kind of old look to them, so I kept rather basic. And by using displacement, I achieved a look that was basically kind of grunge, vintage. What's more, with Goods, it's a plugin which we can use within MODO to transfer things in and from ZBrush by simply clicking once on a button. And that's very useful because you can go on your shape, model this, get it back to you, and eventually you can go to the last step, which is baking maps, and that's the decoration from which I obtained my normal map, my displacement map, and my opacity map. Now, why did I do all of this work to obtain some decoration? Well, let's see what it becomes once I've done this texture, once I have them. Let's move to our second file. Here I prepared a scene for you where we have a basic shape. Let's suppose this is our ceiling. Our ceiling was curved, and the problem behind it was to curve the decoration with it. If we use textures and a plane, it's much easier. So we can grab this decoration and apply a material to it. So we select all the polygons by double-clicking, and by pressing M, we can give a material to it. Let's call it decor. Then we can select all the vertices, and we can use a mesh constraint. So I alt-click to open the options, go into background mode, make sure that I'm on vector mode, and if I move this down, now I have the decoration sticking to the basic mesh. This being said, I can move this a little below, just to avoid overlapping of polygons. And I would like to show you also the rendering part. So let's go into our shader tree. As mentioned before, this is our material, with the basic material being a MODO material, and we will convert this to a vRay material. And then I will go and grab our textures from our folder. So let's get inside here. And I will grab this texture, opacity, normal, and displacement. let's move them into our material group, which is basically a container. And the philosophy of the shader tree is really close to the one of Photoshop. So it works with the layer stacks of where you can change the channel. For each texture, a different channel, or the same channel can be blended with one another. Now, I've imported them, and I have my displacement, and I want this to affect the displacement. So I go on Surface Shading, Displacement. I have my normal, and I want it to affect my normal map. And I have an opacity, which is typical to the vRay material, so I will go on vRay material, and vRay material opacity grayscale. Now, for those who use vRay, this is common, but when you are using displacement maps, you need to activate vRay geometry properties. So we will add a package. I've already added this here, so there is no need, but if you are doing a new mesh, you may need to click your decoration item and click vRay geometry properties. This will allow us to have our decoration with the displacement. And the last step, since we are using a displacement, is to make sure and have the low value, the black value, go into a negative value so that the decoration won't be flying over our sphere. Now let's give it a shot. Let's start our rendering. Now I'm using GPU rendering. Let's move this here. And let's prepare to change the material a little so you can see this better. So let's fake a gold material, and to do so I will use the new metalness, which we will see later on. And as you can see, I managed to have my decoration with simply a plane with 3 textures, 4K each. This is extremely useful, especially on such ceilings that are all curved and are not plane. And beside this part of the to talk about the decoration, I would like to see how I modeled the silhouette. To do so, I will grab one of the textures I've been using. So let's grab our decoration. And as you can see, all you need to do is grab and drop inside of your viewport. Let's scale it and move it a little outside. And for this, I would like to show you both a plugin, which is a procedural mesh. It's Geofront Curves, is an extremely useful plugin, and now you will see why. Let's open a new empty mesh by clicking the N button and activate our plugin with new. And now if I go into my empty mesh and draw some curves, now you will understand what's going on. Let's click and drag something. As you can see, I'm drawing real time this shape. And you may say, yeah, but that's not the size we want. It's not how I expected this. And I don't have enough loops in here to have a smooth passage. But well, that's the good thing about the procedural modeling, that I can select my procedural and get inside of here and change the segments. I can change it by length so that where I need more loops, I will have them. And I can change the size in real time. And now I can go back to my previous curve and start moving it however I want. This is how I did all the line parts. And it's kind of cool because I can go on and build other parts like, let's build, I don't know, this one. And even here, I'm building my curve. For each one, I can change the sides. I can go with different procedurals. Now I won't waste your time by doing this kind of modeling, but it's still worth knowing you have this kind of chance, this kind of possibility to work with. What is cool is that after having done some of these, let's suppose something like this, I will go in the item list as before. I will freeze this, and by freezing this and using the topology pen tool, I can start moving things around and smooth them, And even more useful, I can start model as much as I want with the complete ease, because it's snapping automatically, so I can basically model however I want with kinda easily, I'd say. And by smoothing, I can go back and fix every little problem. As you can see, doing this for all the decoration took a long time, but it's still faster than doing this by extruding manually. I can do the main parts with the plugin and draw this manually with direct modeling once I'm done with those lines, with those gold lines. And that's it for the gold decoration parts, talking about both the texture baking part and the procedural modeling. So going forward, I would like to show you the third argument, which is the parquet, the wood floor. As you may have noticed, the floor was made of square wood tiles. I will show you a rendering here. As you can see, we have a square which makes up, and we will see it in a little. And this square is made basically of 13 wood subtiles with 4 different sides. It's kind of a complex situation, and to shade this with the GPU CUDA required some tweaking here and there. And I would like to show you how I did that, because being the most difficult situation, doing any kind of flooring, even probably easier than that, it's going to be easier too, because seeing the hardest thing will help for sure. So let's open our parquet file. And this is going to be probably the most complex things you will see today. I already know it's not going to be easy, but it's worth trying. So this is our square tile that gets repeated everywhere. And as you can see, it's made of different tiles with different sizes. And what I wanted was avoiding textures, because I don't like using a texture for the whole floor. I wanted to call, I used about 18 textures, which were called randomly for each wood tiles. So each wood tile could go and grab a random texture I fed into it. How did it work? Well, I basically created a schematic view, which is something you may be used to using 3D Studio Max with the Slate Material Editor. And I created a vRay material whose diffuse color was led by these 2 vRay multisubs, and those 2 vRay multisubs were reading different textures. And this means that every single tile could have one of these, and it's completely random. What I achieve is a parquet that looks doesn't look repetitive in any of its places. So even if you have a broad floor and you can see the tiles repeating a lot of times, you won't see the wood within it being repeated over and over. I also use this setup to have a bump value with the color of the texture, and that's because MODO converts colors to grayscale whenever he needs it. And I also use the texture color to achieve some anisotropy effect for lightening and roughness, and it's being color corrected. Now, the big problem, and we will see this rendered in a minute, was to have this as a floor on a rather large size of the room. To do so, I had to use a plugin, because we can achieve instances in MODO. We can duplicate our items. What we can't do is instance and duplicate our hierarchies, like in this case, where we have a main item, which is leading as a locator everything else. We can't instance all of these. So what I did was instance cloning the locator. Let's call it the locator, and let's set a distance which is the size of our wood tile. And as you can see, I have instanced an empty mesh item basically. What I need to do is use the pipeline kit from Alexander Kusera, and by instancing the hierarchies, I get the floor to be replicated all over my floor. So let's try and render this so you can see what it means to have different tiles everywhere. Let's activate our preview and render with GPU, which is the important part. And as you can see, I don't have any repetition in the textures. And now, just to go a little more advanced, and I will stop there, I promise, just to add some more color into this. As you can see, some tiles are brighter, some tiles are darker. I use the power of the shader tree as well. So as we saw before, we have all those tiles that goes into the vRay material thanks to the schematic, but we are also overriding them with a process texture, which is making it a little more darker. So if I were to unuse it, you can see what's happening. This is the real wood I used, but I'm processing it to have a darker look. And I'm using another multi-sub, which, as you can see, is made of different shades of gray. And just so it's clear, if I don't use the blending mode, soft light, and use full opacity, this is what is happening. As you will do in Photoshop, I'm changing the blending mode so that I can achieve a little effect of difference between each wood tile, and that will help me have the most realistic look on this wood flooring on this parquet. So this is like the most complex thing we will see today. I had to do this kind of setup because GPU rendering doesn't allow me to use anything like variation texture. I had to use the render ID, which is something vRay user should know. And render ID works with each item having its own ID, and it's what I did here. And to make it a little more less heavy, let's say, I instanced every single item. So I managed to achieve the total randomness of 18 texture plus my vRay multi-sub, changing the color once again completely randomly. So going back to our project, the fourth part will be the lightning pass. Once I'm done with building my house, so I've built my walls, the flooring, the ceiling, I like to try out my lightning, and thanks to Optics Denoiser, it's really fast. What I usually do, since I'm a MODO user, it's setting a white material, and we will look at that white material in detail because it's not gonna be full white. I like to place a white material and check my exposure and if the lightning has the mood I'm looking for. We are lucky enough to have the adaptive HDRI now in MODO and vRay for MODO, which means it's faster now to render with an HDRI compared to other lights in several cases. And that was very the opposite before. Also, we have bucket GPU render, which is the fastest way to render with GPU, because it's an adaptive method and it's a bucket method. It has as a drawback the fact that you can't go back and add some more passes to clean it up, but it's also the fastest way to go at it, to render. So we will have a look at this as well, and both those settings will allow to avoid portals and have low render times. So let's open the main scene and get inside our villa. And just to let you see how it is, I will enable this so you can see the inner part of it. And how do you import? We will see two things. How do we have an override material? I know that in 3D Studio Max you have to activate override material. It's a voice. We don't have to do that in MODO. We work with the shader tree, so we can override everything pretty easily. And we can add our lightning as easy as that. So let's start with adding our dome light. First off, we go to add item, and we search for a thing called dome light. It's the same as in 3D Studio Max. I will disable the one I'm using right now, so we won't have double lightning. And now that I have my dome light, I will move into shading. Let's avoid saving. Perfect. Let's go into shading, into lights, and here I have my dome light working. Now I want an HDRI within it, so let's go and grab our imported images. And I've used this texture. We will see that in detail later on. But let's simply grab and drop. Let's make sure it's wrapping as I want it. So this is a spherical map. So I go into projection type, and I want it to be spherical on the Y. And since I already know I rotated it a little, I will go into texture and rotate my HDRI of 80 degrees. Now, this is how we add an HDRI in MODO. Make sure that you have disabled the environment, because we are using the dome light, so we don't need to use the environment. And by using the eye icon, we can enable and disable. Now we need to override everything with a white material. How do we do that? Well, the shader tree works as close, as I said, to the Photoshop layers. So the topmost layer overrides everything below it. In this case, all you need to do is place a vRay material below the base shader and above all the other materials. So let's delete this just to see how it's done. Add layer, vRay materials, and vRay material. And just so you know, I'm not using a full white color. That's because GGX and PBR materials don't really have a full white or full black color. They don't exist in nature. Not even snow is full white. To work with reality and being realistic, we need to set a number that is much more plausible. In this case, to have a plausible white, we are going to use a light gray as this one. I'm also not using a reflection color right now, so we won't have reflection, because as you may already know, reflections on a dielectric materials are around 2 to 4%, so they are really low and are affecting very little this kind of scenery, and they still would remove render times from my test. So not using this won't really affect my quality, but will affect render times. So now that we have done this, I will make sure that I have the optics denoiser active, just so you know how it works. And I will start my rendering. So let's click on this button, which is what you may know as the EPR mode. In MODO is known as the RT, real time. And considering we are overriding all the decoration, we don't have to load them into the cache, so loading all the geometry will be rather fast, considering the floor, the moldings. And let's see this cooking. It's gonna swap automatically to the denoise effect, so we just have to wait a little for this to clean up. Good, and this is the results after 18 seconds, 20 seconds. It's still very blotchy, but it's giving me already a feeling of the mood of the scene. I have chosen a morning scene, so the sun is rather low. I have a pinkish color and a bluish color, and as you can see, it's not intense enough. I'm not having even a little overburn over here, which means I need to increase the quality and the intensity of the HDRI. So I go into dome light, and in his Titan properties, I increase the radiance to something like 7. I'm working on a dual Xeon 20 cores and a dual 1070s, so it's not a bad PC. It's not even the top, so I'm not using 2080 Ti or something like that. And now I'm having something closer to my initial result, in what I rendered as a final image. Remember how this is cleaning up the image, because we will see both the optics denoiser, which is this one, and the NVIDIA default denoiser. We will see which one is better and why that is. As you can see, the more the time goes on, the more it cleans, and I'm starting to see more and more the details of this environment. I've let it cook for about 5 minutes over here, and I've achieved this kind of look. This is plenty enough for me to understand how the scene will look at the end, especially in this case where my only light source was an HDRI. We have some artificial lighting over here, but it's really a little compared to everything else, and you can understand it by the blue shades we have everywhere. And this gives us the chance to even go somewhere like on this spot and let it cook and clean this extremely fast to see how this will look in the end. So, having said that, if you want to have a pause or something, let me know. It's not a problem.
5 minutes, so we can continue. Fine. Do we have some question on this point of modeling, rendering? Is everything clear? Yes, Irina, welcome. Can you talk a little bit closer to the microphone? Please, don't be shy.
Hello, my
Hello.
name is Irina, and I have one question.
Yes.
Is it possible to easily import a 3ds Max file to MODO?
Well, in MODO you have two choices. You either export with FBX, which is one solution in the importing to MODO. The second solution that most of the studio are using right now is to use the vRay format, which is a format proprietary of Chaos Group. So you can prepare, if you're skilled with 3D Studio Max and vRay, you can prepare your asset with your materials with that software and then export for vRay. The best solution, in my opinion, is to export, for how I work, is to export an FBX and work within MODO. Personally, I prefer this way, mainly because each software behaves better when he has the models made cleaned up for his own. So if you use vRay, you won't really be able to change many things of your file. I know there should be a way to export a VR scene and have it work with an FBX. I'm not sure because I'm not using that technique. What I prefer to do is build everything for MODO within MODO or clean external meshes, especially for MODO. That's because there are several, you risk to import things such as broken UV maps, normal maps, which you don't want, vertex normal maps, which you don't want, keeping everything as clean as possible and trying to build a pipeline on a single software. It's what I've done up to now. So I moved away from 3D Studio Max, both for the price and because I could do pretty much the same thing over here with MODO and vRay. But yeah, to answer you, you can export with the VR scenes and you can also export to render an entire scene ready to go. And what you get into 3D Studio Max will probably be the same in MODO. They are still working on it, so it's in development, but the results are pretty good. Consider that you can use when you're using the render cloud, so you are using the Chaos Group cloud farm, you're basically exporting a VR scene that will be rendered on their farms. So, and that's what happens every time you try to render with vRay. So you should not have big problems when moving files around.
Sorry, I would like to say something. Michele, according to me, what it's really important of what Michele showed us is the real time. Because the point is that here we are making projects mainly more than visualization. So in the meanwhile, we build 3D models like you are showing us. We need to visualize what we are doing, right? Because visualizing, we can get a feedback of the project, of what we are working on, and make some changes. If to make changes and to visualize what we are doing is taking us 1 hour and not 20 seconds, it's making a lot in terms of design, right? But I need to wait 1 hour for take a decision, or I can wait just how much it was this? How long it take this image with the denoiser?
The one I did was 5 minutes. This one with the denoiser, I can do a final rendering with all the materials in 2K in 20 minutes or so. And I'm using a really low noise threshold, so you can go a little higher and use some more denoiser, so you can even lower those render times. And by using the cloud farm, you can render basically in seconds, and you don't need to do anything. For those who use the cloud or other render farms, you know that usually you get lots of problems. You have to fix hundreds of things. With the cloud farm, you press rendering and you send it, and the problem is solved. He's going to render for you. So that's very useful when working on. And I'm doing this right now for a door handle company, where they are selling, where they didn't know how much they could do with 3D. Right now, we are visualizing their product with so many different finishings that they are capable of showing their client something that they don't even have in stock. And I can show you something like this. Let's stop this rendering so I can be clear on what I mean. But these kind of door handles, these kind of products, and this kind of finishing and so on, they don't exist yet. So the company is capable of seeing what their product will look like and advertise their product to their client by using this method. That's extremely valuable in my opinion, and it's how I've been using it up to now to build catalogs, but also to build a certain relationship with their clients, which makes my presence to my client even more valuable.
All right, thank you.
Okay, to go on, let's go back.
Michele, if I'm talking now, you hear me?
A bit far away, I can barely hear you, but I can understand.
All right, so Irina, maybe you can stay on your place and talk through the microphone with loud voice.
I have another question, and I would like to know, do you buy models, or you just modeling by your hand every single object in the scene?
If I buy models, 3D models, it happens both ways, because I work both as a modeler for certain companies, so I have my own things. I have my library of models. Some models are not online, so I can't buy them, and I have to model on my own. But yeah, most of the time, whenever I can, I try to buy them. And if I manage to, from 3D Sky, Design Connected, and so on, I use them basically. I use them as FBX, and the texture are usually more than fine, because most of the people building models usually do textures for both vRay and Corona, so I can basically use the FBX without problems. I do both anyway, because sometimes I get requested with antiquary vintage stuff, which is not online. Whenever I can. Sometimes I don't even need to build or buy, because as you can see in this scene, both the table and this chair were given to me by the furniture company. So I used their models. I didn't have to buy nor to model anything from this to this. I was given also this kind of ceiling wall lamps and this table lamp, even though they gave me the CAD files, so I had to do some retopology. I was given this kind of chair, which I remodeled because their model was a CAD model, and I preferred to clean it up. And that wasn't on any kind of market online. And for example, even the door handles were made by me for my the door handle company I work with. So it depends. I have three sources: myself buying or directly requesting to the furniture companies from which we will end up buying. So that's in their interest to give us their models.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
So,
Not anyone go ahead, right? Another question. Well, close to the microphone. We'll have the wireless microphone.
Hello, I have one question. If you make your own model, you will sell it or using by yourself only?
I should start selling, but I'm really too lazy to prepare everything related to marketing, mainly because I don't even have the time when I'm working on this kind of projects. I either have too much work on my hands and I end up stashing the models away. And the other problem is that some models I do are done thanks to CADs or drawings from the furniture companies, and they usually request you to not share the models. So you either model things in order for them to be slightly different, but you still may risk to have some problems selling the model if they are old-minded, because actually you're doing them a favor. By selling their model are out there in the market, everyone can use them, but that's not something that you can decide. So I have some still difficulties on some of the modeling I do, because the clients asked me to avoid sharing that model. They give it to me because they know we will buy, if the client accepts, he will buy that product. For everything else, I prefer avoiding the problem of selling and then being, I don't know, having problems with the furniture company. A lamp such as this is worth like $3,000. So the client itself is, the furniture company itself is kind of strict when it comes to giving it to people. And we had to prove that there was a project behind. It was kind of a bother. So yeah, I'm not selling yet. That's something I should start doing. This scene will be free though, so I will share it in the YouTube channel I'm streaming from. So you can go and pick it up and have these models, have the scene. You will be able to render this with vRay for MODO however you want. I had to remove the books because those are paid models, but everything else was done either by me or by companies that are fine with me sharing the models.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So, shall I go on?
Yes, let's go. Thank you.
Well, the fifth part of this workshop is related to materials. The GGX materials, which you should already know. And that's basically how Chaos Group translated the PBR technology, which means physically based rendering technology, into a shader, a material. PBR was invented by Disney and Pixar. There are several papers, and I will share them with your teacher if you want to have a look. They will explain how to build a physically based material. GGX is the way to go in that case. When I say shading it's easy if you follow science, I mean exactly this. The moment you know that there are two kinds of materials, and it's dielectrics and metals, you know how reflection works. And once you use reflections the right way, you are going to have a plausible material in front of you. It might not be perfect, but if it's plausible, you will be allowed to have several benefits. One of those is to be able to change lighting in a scene without having to change the materials. You are kind of young, so you may not know, but up to 5 to 6 years ago, if you were to change the lighting in a scene, you had to change the materials with it, because you were faking a material with a certain lighting. With GGX materials and PBR, you don't need to do that anymore. You can go straight to change your lights, and the material, being plausible, being scientifically based, will look pleasing, will look nice either way. They will look realistic. Another thing I would like to point out is that less is better unless you know what you're doing, which means something I've noticed a lot of times are designers that tend to fill their environment with different materials, different shapes, different volumes, different colors. That means having a patchwork effect, which is chaotic, and the client will surely not work unless you know what you're doing, exactly what you're doing, and you're aiming for a definite look. In this case, we built this scene. Let me go back to it. We built this scene by doing something very basic, but that worked very well, which is we had a ceiling which had to remain. So this wasn't to be touched. Everything else had to be new. So we went inside of this and picked the color to be used in the environment. So you can see that we have gold here and gold on our lamps and our door handles. We went here and picked this green and used it on the chair, as you can see here and here. Now this is overlighted and this is in shadow, but that's the same color. And we used whitish color, kind of creamy color over here to match our ceiling, being ruined as it is. Everything is made in order to have the same color being recalled from what could not be touched, and everything else is as simple as possible. So we have a very complex shape on the ceiling, we have complex drawings, but if you notice, our moldings, the doors, and even the chair or the small table or the library are very geometric, very easy shapes. And that's even the material. We have basic black, white, and again white. And that's to avoid to clutter the scene with too much information. This was really, the client really liked this because besides having a painterly look, it looked pleasing because he really noticed the fact that we went in and picked the color here and there and used what was already in the scene. And going back to our slide, the last thing I will mention with the GGX materials is that now we have glossy Fresnel and metalness on GPU. I don't know if you've been working with Next, but in Next we have glossy Fresnel, which we will see what it means. And we have metalness, which is finally the correct way to apply a metal to a material. Before we had to change the IOR and we had to use impossible values below 5, above 5, above 10 just to achieve a metal. Now we can use the IOR of a metal and use the metalness. First, I would like to show you what it means to have correct shading, which is in this case using a daylight scene like this, having only the HDRI and lumigons. Lumigons are the vRay material light, luminescent polygons. And this is the HDRI I used, so kind of a morning or early day. And this is an evening shot with HDRI lumigons, some area lights on top and below each lamp, and mesh lights for this line of lighting over here. And the HDRI this time is this one, which I smoothed out, I blurred it because I didn't need all of these details, and I darkened it a little to achieve this evening look. Between the two images, I didn't change anything in the materials. This may look normal to you, but that's something really useful for those who have been around for some years now, because that's allowing you to propose your interior, your architectural visualization in different light settings. Especially in this case, you can show how it will look once it's lightened up, and that's something the clients will surely appreciate. Especially now that rendering an image took so little time, it's really easy to go in, test several HDRI, and have the client know how his house will look under different circumstances. Now, let's see what I mean by glossy Fresnel and metalness. So let's go on our shader ball. This scene was given to me by Mohammed, which is an extremely talented artist, which modeled this and shared his file with us. And let's start our GPU rendering and have a look to what glossy Fresnel actually is, why it makes a big change, and what is metalness. Let's grab our material. We can easily select material by clicking, left-clicking in the render viewport of vRay, which is extremely useful. Right now I built a metal, so let's start from 0. So let's remove all of these and all of these. So let's start with glossy Fresnel. Glossy Fresnel is basically a setting that vRay has since a couple of years that allows you to have a correct Fresnel curve at this angle of incidence, a high level of incidence. So let's pick a color like this one and add some reflection color. And let's pick a spot where you can see what I'm talking about. So if I lower my reflection glossiness, nothing happens here. We are not having any artifact or problem. Let's disable glossy Fresnel, and that is what is happening. You are getting a retroglazing refraction, which makes your sphere completely white on the sides, and that's wrong. That is now possible to solve on GPU as well, and that was the last thing we needed to be able to do architectural visualization on vRay using the GPU. Now that it works, you can basically activate it always, and remember that you have no more problems when moving the reflection glossiness. The second thing I would like to see is the metalness, which is basically the new method to achieve a metal in vRay. And before we had to, I will show you how I will do that before. I will remove my diffuse color, I will activate something yellow, and use a high Fresnel IOR, which is wrong, it's not physically based. What we must do now is simply keep it white on the reflection color because that's physically correct. We pick our metal color over here, so let's place something like gold, and we place 1 on metalness, which has to be either 1 or 0. 0 is a dielectric material, 1 is a metal, and we got our metal by simply activating one button. Now you can simply ignore reflection color because it has to be always white. That's how material works, and you can change your metal by changing its diffuse color and using the metalness amount. Now that we saw this, let's go back to this and let's go forward. Finally, we are closer to the ending. We have the final render settings. They are extremely simple, so I'm not telling you anything new or any secret recipe. They are so good that you basically can use the default settings. I will let you understand why. But basically, by knowing this, you can just click render and you will probably achieve, almost surely achieve a clean rendering. The 3 settings we need to learn are min and max subdivisions, the noise thresholds, and by using the denoiser we can get our clean rendering. Remember to use adaptive method for bucket renderings. Now that we have bucket on GPUs, not using it would be bad. It's really the fastest method out there. I had immense gains in render speed. And just to let you see how it works, and to see also the default denoiser, so the one we use for the final renderings, let's go back to MODO. And let's go back to our main scene. I will keep everything white so you can see the difference between what we saw before, which is our white scene, pardon, this one, which denoised looked like this, and the default denoiser. So to start with, let's get the settings open by clicking on DM for vRay main, and the settings we need to know are these. We need the sampler type into adaptive. We need to leave a minimum subdivision to 1 because this is telling your software to launch one sample for one pixel. You rarely need to go above this unless you have very thin geometries or motion blur, something moving, and you may have different resolution solutions. You need to set the max subdivs. Default is 24, and you can use the default because it's already a perfect setting. I like to go way beyond it by using a level of 50, and the normal threshold will be 0.01. With these three settings, you get clean renderings. Even there, I prefer to lower this a little bit once again, just because so I can make use of my workstation. And with these three settings, the last thing we need to set up is the denoiser, which we have enabled, and remove NVIDIA AI denoiser and use the default one. I will use the default, the mild preset, and let's click the preview and see how different it is from the optics denoiser, which is the NVIDIA one. I have prepared a slide while it loads, which denoiser to choose. If you have to choose between the two, remember to use vRay denoiser for the final renderings, because you can tweak its intensity even when the rendering is done with. You can use mild, normal, you can use a hard denoising, or you can use a custom denoise. And remember to use optics denoiser for real-time preview. It has good results in few seconds compared to the vRay denoiser, but it doesn't work really well for final renderings. So let's have a look over here. This is the denoised results for the default vRay denoiser. As you can see, there is barely any change with the non-denoised version. And I will take a crop out of it so that you will see how it's actually working. Because the vRay denoiser works best when you give it enough samples. So the more sample it has, the better it cleans. As you can see, it's cleaning rather fast now, and the difference with the main one is still thin, but that's the best solution for final renderings where the noise is thin and widespread on top of everything. As you can see, it's smashing the noise in all the points. So you have seen how clean the optics denoiser is in a few seconds. That's because it uses deep learning to clean the noise right away. The problem is that the final rendering will look blotchy, will look painterly, will look not completely realistic. With the vRay denoiser, you manage to have the real feeling of your scene. As you can see, it's slowly cleaning everything up. And when you're working, for example, with you need to tweak this material or this chair, you want to move things around, cropping the scene and having the denoiser do its job is really the best way to go around and avoid hours of waiting. Plus, as you saw before, I'm only using an HDRI, so I'm not using any portal. There is no more need for that, thanks to the new algorithm, which means all the lighting I need to do is one dome light outside, and everything else is rather fast to deal with, because being so fast to render compared to before I had to use another scene with another lighting, study the model in there, and that took a while because I had to move in and out between two scenes and check if things were making any sense. Now I can simply work inside my main scene, let the denoiser clean the rendering, wait a bit, and everything is done. What's more, right now I'm using a full GPU, so even my monitor is using the GPU. I'm using a video capture, I'm using Hangouts, I've opened Chrome, PDF, and as you can see I have zero delay, even though my GPU are working at 100%, the both of them. That's something that has been improved with vRay Next, and that is you don't need to use low priority anymore. You can go straight with full power while being able to work with your scene. So I can take this and move this around in real time with no problem whatsoever. So having said which denoiser and what settings we should use, I will move to the last part, which is the render passes. That's something that is requested continuously by any new user in any software, and that's how do you prepare batch renderings. I don't know if you ever experienced to render several images overnight and not having a batch renderer, which means having to wake up and click the next render and save each one, or simply having to change something within the scene while you're rendering different cameras. Now we will see how it's done with the render passes in MODO, where we will change between the two cameras, and we will add some modification along the way. The good part of this is that it works with the vRay cloud render farm, so you can basically send everything to the farm and have dozens of your cameras to be rendered in a row. So if I go in here, let's pause our rendering. If I go in here and hide my VFB, you will notice, let's delete our existing render pass so I can show you this from zero. And let's activate one of the items that is missing, which is this one. Now we have two cameras in this scene, and I want to render both of them. But if I were to click here, I will probably rendering only one image because I don't have any render pass ready. So by clicking on pass groups, I will create my first pass, and I will prepare all the passes for this group. One will be camera 4. I will click auto add to start adding any change I do to this pass, and select this as render camera and apply. And I will create another pass which will store the other camera. So I will go in here, set as render camera, apply. Now if I move between the two, and go here, if I move between the two, you can see I'm basically activating one camera or another, and this can be used to render them in a sequence. But it's not only that. You can also change other things, such as hiding certain items. So for instance, as you can see, this table, small table here is fine, but it's cutting into my scene right down here, and I don't want it. So I click here, search for this, and I remove it and apply, so that when I move on the camera 4, it's there. When I move on the camera 5, it's not there anymore. I could do this for kind of everything. So I could do like hide the spoof when I'm on camera 4, and it will get back and go away. And to render this, all we need to do is go on vRay and use the standalone version. And by using the standalone version, we can use our pass and tell it to render however we want. So we can use the production rendering, which is GPU, or use the real-time GPU render, which uses both GPU and graphic cards. And we can check our max denoise in here and export our scene to be rendered later on. The standalone is extremely useful because by using this, you are capable of rendering with vRay externally to MODO. So you can go on working with MODO while you are rendering with vRay somewhere else. So if everything is clear, I will recap which were the renderings, which were these. And the last shoe made at 4K with GPU Next the last week, because it came out 2 weeks ago, so I rebuilt the scene just to work for the GPU rendering. And that's just to sum up what we saw. We saw procedural modeling, both for building walls, but also for building the silhouette of the decorations. We saw how I moved from my photographs of the decoration to the 3D models, how to build a customized wood floor with different tiles picked randomly, and how to use instances on the whole room. We saw how I lightened up the environment by using simply a dome light, in which I dragged and dropped an HDRI. the GGX materials, which are PBR, so physically based renders, and picking the right colors. So when you're doing some interior projects, remember to not go too much into depth with hundreds of colors. Try to stay at least at the beginning on a palette of colors that makes sense. We mentioned the render settings and denoiser, which one render settings are to be used, and which denoiser works better where, and how do render passes works for batch actions, which can be used really for everything. So you can activate a lamp or disable it, and you can do night rendering with it. You can activate an HDRI compared to another, or change the intensity of that HDRI. So you pretty much have total control of your scene with each different pass. That's all. Thank you for following me. If you have any question, I'm here.
Thank you, Michele. Yeah, I think we have some questions, right?
I will drink.
So, how much time it took to make all these projects? From when you start, from when you finish?
It took about a month, not working only on this because the client kept changing ideas. So this kind of job was kind of uncommon. I had to go in and out with different requests, and we had several iterations, both for the furniture of the 3 rooms. So it took about 1 month to decide everything and prepare. It was rather fast on my hand. I had to wait for direction by the one dealing with this job, and it's actually not done with yet. Consider that this villa has 4 floors and has hundreds of cameras, so basically it will take me another couple of years to finish this kind of project.
I see. Any other question? Yeah. On the microphone. Can you comment? So I will.
Very simple. What GPU stands for?
What?
GPU.
I will answer. GPU is to make the calculation with the graphic card, right, Michele?
Yes. CPU is the chipset, so it's the processor of the PC, like my dual sound. The GPU is the graphic card, so it's like your NVIDIA card. In this case, it's GPU CUDA, which means any of the NVIDIA products, so GTX or RTX or Quadro, whichever graphic card you want to use. It's kind of important as a rendering source because it's much easier to build a PC with 4 GPUs compared to a PC with 4 processors, which you can't basically. So, and what's more, the graphic card is much faster in this kind of tasks where you need to throw billions of rays into a scene. Now that we have everything that we may ask for in terms of lights and materials, using the graphic card allows you to have to spend little money to build your workstation and have a render farm in your own house.
And also, in my experience to rendering with GPU, the really important stuff is that in the meanwhile you can use the computer for do something else. So you launch the rendering, and in the meanwhile you need to make the model of something else, and you don't need to computer for the rest.
You said you will put it on YouTube and share the channel.
Sorry?
He said he will put something on YouTube, like a video or something.
Yeah, I think it's recorded, this lesson.
There is both the record. This lesson is on YouTube right now, is in streaming, and there will be a scene that I already put in the comments below. You can download it and test vRay for MODO, which is in beta right now, so you can try it for free by requesting the beta access. It's automatic, so you just give them your email and you get replied your trial. And by using MODO, which has 1 month of free trial, and if you are students, you can get an entire year. So you can use both for free for a long time and have a test with this specific scene.
All right, so we will give all the reference about the video and about the files after the lesson.
Also,
Welcome.
ask a question. Sorry, does MODO work good for PC and Mac just in the same way?
MODO works both on MODO and Mac, and I guess also Linux, if I remember correctly.
Yeah,
So,
also Linux.
yeah, it works kind of everywhere, so you can use it everywhere. I have a friend of mine rendering with vRay for MODO on a Mac, so you can also use vRay for MODO and and MODO with a Mac. I'm on Windows right now, but it makes no difference.
Yeah, it's identical. The software I have been checking in the previous studio and both of the one.
If you can compare the MODO and Blender, what Blender works
Did you hear, Michele?
No?
So if we make in comparison MODO with Blender, which is the super free and standard,
Yeah.
like a free software, why to choose MODO, right? Why MODO it's better in comparison with Blender?
Well, I did stop using Blender about 10 years ago, so I know it got way better in times, especially lately. What I didn't like and I can't really click with Blender is the interface and how it works as user experiences. I happen to use it from time to time, rarely, for certain tasks where it's faster. The problem with the Blender is that it's more unstable than MODO to me. I crashed a lot of time, especially on the latest builds. And it's lacking something like fall-offs fall-offs, which are a modeling tool in MODO, especially on everything. You can use fall-off pretty much everywhere. It's lacking the mesh operation as in MODO. It has, I don't know if it has his own procedural modeling, but the one in MODO to me gives me the chance to work on a wider, on a broader experience and field of work. For example, I use procedural mesh to, I'm working on a high road projects now. We are building the high roads of a city here in Italy, and I built several assets with procedural mesh to place automatically the guardrails, protection, acoustic protection by simply drawing a curve, which is similar to what I shown you before, but being used a little more skillfully with a little more care behind. So those are the two things I care the most about. What's more, Blender, being a free software, makes it difficult to certain developers to import their plugins. And it's the case with vRay, which is very behind in terms of rendering with Blender compared to MODO, Maya, and other softwares. We are especially lucky with vRay because we have one of the best developers from Chaos Group, which is Vladimir Nadev, and he is one of the earliest developers in Chaos Group, extremely capable. We have a direct contact with him, and that's the main reason I decided to stick with MODO. What's more, MODO may have the vRay updates later compared to 3D Studio Max and Maya, but that could be seen as a benefit because we are getting the full next package without all the bugs that other users had to deal with. So we are not beta testing kind of anything. Those on 3D Studio Max and Maya do have to deal with a little more unstable software, while with MODO we get basically everything when it is polished enough to be used, and that's another reason. Then my experience with Blender stops with really a few things here and there. I dropped it because it was kind of complex moving around and modeling. What's more, in MODO we have Mesh Fusion, which is one of the best procedural modeling with booleans around. I suggest you to give it a look because it's really worth it for those who like hard surface modeling. All in all, it has kind of everything I need. I can do pretty much everything, and that's the reason. Plus, Blender is free, but the plugin it uses most of the times are not, while MODO having small to mid community has really cheap plugins like the one I'm using, and the overall price of MODO, I pay like 400 euros a year, or 300 and something euros a year for the maintenance, or people can pay 60 euro a month. And for an images such as these can be sold for $800, $1,000. So I can basically repay MODO in like half a day. And that's not really my problem with money.
So in comparison, let's say the income you get for those images of the villa cover the price of the software for?
Well, for this villa, the price, my earnings for this villa will cover the price for MODO for the next 5 to 6 years, probably even more. So just this job itself, that took me, I'd say 1 month, but consider me working 1-2 hours a day, because I was given information really with the spoon, so really slowly.
So one month of one project is covered 6 years of maintenance of the software.
Yeah, without troubles.
So this one is the proportion. It makes sense.
Yeah, I'm also using this because it has a nice Unity or Unreal connection. So right now we are discussing a possible project with a shirt company that may want to build a configurator for their fabrics. And this will require us to move between Unity and Androids. And MODO allowed me to move real-time assets real fast and to render different iterations. Thank you to render passes real fast. Those are all things that if you get used to, you can't really go back to something else. I did try Blender. For a while, MODO was really unstable to me. The 901 of MODO was pure hell. There were several problems. With the MODO 13, in the 2 weeks I'm using it, I have never crashed once. And that's kind of good, in my opinion, considering I'm using the first service pack, which is as soon as it was released, and I'm using the beta of vRay. No crashes. To me, it's rather it's a benefit compared to other software where I'm still having crashes. I managed to crash from time to time from Blender. I managed to crash from time to time in MODO, but I crashed so little that, in my opinion, it's worth the money.
All right. Thank you. Any other question? No, finish the question time. All right. So, Michele, time to say goodbye. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, everyone. Hope you have sparked some interest. And if you need anything, you can use my email if you are